Hey everybody, welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed, the television edition. Good to have you with me. And whether you're watching us on MPTS or IPMNation.com, I do want to remind you, and if you are watching us on IPMNation.com, you already know this, but there is an active chat room at IPMNation.com/MCUTV. So if you'd like to participate in the conversation at all, you can. Or, of course, if you post on Facebook, too, we do have the Matt Connarton Unleashed Facebook page. So, again, if you're watching live, you can always opine or post something on the Facebook page, and I'll try to remember to keep an eye on it. Sometimes I get so unleashed, I don't remember to pay attention to these things. But even if I don't remember to pay attention, you can at least chat with other viewers or listeners as I'm opining myself and yelling into the camera. So, couple just quick housekeeping things before we get into today's topics. So if you're watching us live on Wednesday, I'm very excited, very happy, because later tonight on Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades, making his triumphant return will be my favorite Republican, the Honorable Gary S. Hopper. You know, he's been out for a couple of months now. I think it's been 6 to 8 weeks with dealing with a bit of a health issue, but he's okay. But he'll be in tonight. So very excited to see Gary. It's been a while, so looking forward to that. I have no idea what he has planned for that show, if we have a guest or what's going to happen. But I know Gary's going to be here. I was just thinking, it'd be really funny. Of course, it's too late to work this out now, but if maybe, like if I hadn't said anything about Gary being here later, and then we just started the show, Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades, with just me sitting here talking like Gary's not going to be here. And then, if you ever watch wrestling, Gary comes running in and hits me with a steel chair or something. That'd be awesome. Of course, I shouldn't have said that. We probably still had time to work that out. Now it wouldn't be a surprise if we did it now. But now the more I think about it, it's probably just as well, because neither myself nor Gary have had any training as a professional wrestler. So if we did try to pull off a stunt like that, it'd probably result with, at least one of us going to the emergency room. And by one of us, I mean me, because I'd be the one getting hit with the chair. They don't do chair shots anymore. If you ever watch wrestling, like if you watch WWE, they don't do the chair shots to the head anymore, because concussions and whatnot. Ever since Chris Benoit, what was that, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, when he went nuts and killed his family and then killed himself, and kind of made a lot of people think, well, maybe we ought to rethink the chair shots to the head. Big surprise! It seems to cause some sort of neurological trauma. Who knew? So very excited about that. I also want to mention, too, last week's show we had Carl Lentz along with Gus Breton. So it was good to see Gus, and I was meeting Carl for the first time. Very interesting show. And if you haven't seen the show, it's already up on YouTube. Gus posted it up on YouTube, but it will also be available on IPMNation.com. We do archive all the shows. So this weekend, I would look for it on Saturday. We'll say Saturday. We should have it up. It will be last week's show. Carl talked a lot about common law and ways to use common law, if you have to go to court for something. Very, very interesting stuff, and useful, actionable information with, that you can actually apply to your life if you get yourself into a sticky legal situation. Very, very interesting conversation. So if you missed last week's show, I would definitely recommend checking it out. And by the way, we do have all the show times and the archives posted at IPMNation.com/MCUTV. So I wanted to mention that too, because like I said, it's something you want to see if you missed it. We'll get into this week's topics. I have a few things I want to talk about. Glenn R.J. Willett, we were discussing our first issue right before going on the air. And I'm going to say something about this that is probably going to surprise my regular viewers and listeners. I say listeners because we also have the radio version of the show, Thursday nights at 9 p.m. on the Dr. Kevin Radio Network. Last little bit of housekeeping. Okay, that's all the housekeeping, I promise, till the end of the show. And before I tell you what the issue is, this has been, it's been something that's been a hot topic nationally, and it's not Ukraine. I have talked a lot about Ukraine, but I'm going to surprise people because I know, I'm well aware, I get a lot of feedback on the show, particularly with this version, the television version of the show. I hear from various folks, and the perception of me, and what I'm going to do today is going to kind of fly in the face of that, but I'm aware of the perception of me in terms of where I am politically and how that is a bit different to a lot of people than what I claim. You know, I always talk about how I'm an independent. I'm not a member of any political party, not anymore. I'm a recovering Democrat. And I'm very centrist in my views, and that is one of the reasons why I can't be a part of a party. Because as a centrist, I don't feel like there is a party for me. You know, we've seen the polarization of the two parties, and the Republican Party, I think there are elements in the Republican Party that have, with some degree of success, pulled the party very far right in some areas. And we have a Democratic Party that also drifted too far to the left for me. The polarization in terms of the Democratic Party, which drove me out of the party, is not as overt, but it's there and it's real. And so, you know, I'm kind of a man without a party. Now, the perception of me that a lot of people have, and I hear it all the time, is that I really am just a liberal Democrat, pretending to be an independent, pretending to be a centrist. And I know why that perception is out there. I understand, because I do discuss a lot of social issues on this show, and also, too, on Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades, and that plays into the perception of me as well. You know, on that show, because Gary is a conservative Republican, and he tends to bring on a lot of conservative Republican guests. So on Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades, I'm almost always the most liberal guy in the room by default, even though I don't define myself as a liberal. You know, I mean, we had Dave Fine on while Gary was out, and Dave may be more liberal than I am, but you know, so we always joke that next to Gary I look like Karl Marx. So I think that plays into the perception of me. And, you know, I've been on the Progress Report recently a couple times, and the last time I was on, because Mike Farley couldn't be there, so Bob invited me on, and we talked about a nonpartisan issue. We talked about local transit here in Manchester, New Hampshire. But prior to that, I'd gone on. We talked about the death penalty, and you know that's an issue where I agree with those guys. So that and you know, Mike and Bob, they're both liberals. Mike Farley and Bob Backus. So if I go on that show and we discuss an issue where I agree with them, that reinforces a perception of me. And also on this show, on my own show, I've sort of hyper-focused on the sort of the factioning, the fractionating that's gone on in the Republican Party, this almost a civil war going on in the Republican Party. And my sort of criticism, to put it lightly, of some of the factions in the Republican Party. You know, people hear me kind of laugh about some of these people and point out some of the things that I think are ridiculous about the modern Republican Party. And so that reinforces the view of me, the perception of me that I really am just a liberal. By the way, before we go any further, something from Gary. Our guest, I don't have the full text of his Facebook post here, but it looks like our guest tonight will be the Honorable Ross Terrio, who is a Republican. So he will be our guest on Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades tonight. And as usual, I will be the most liberal guy in the room, which is fine. But that will also reinforce the perception of me. Ross defines himself as a moderate Republican, not so conservative, but he seems to take the conservative position on every issue. So, and that's not meant as any kind of a criticism or an attack. I like Ross, and I consider him a friend, and he's been on this show. And Ross is a great guy. I like Ross very much. But I think he's more conservative than he lets on when he's running for something. So the reason I say all this is because the issue that I'm going to discuss in a moment, I'm going to take the Republican position on this issue, and I think it's going to surprise people who have the perception of me as really just being a liberal who pretends to be an independent and a centrist. It's an issue that is being hotly and fiercely debated in the legislative branch of our federal government right now. It's been dragging on for a while now, and I kind of had some mixed feelings about it, but I've decided that the Republicans are right on this one. Now, I know I keep, let's see if you can, from what I've said so far, if you can figure out what the issue is. I'll drop another hint here, and then we'll get to what it actually is, but a little more build up to this. I talk a lot about social issues, and I do very much on most social issues take the liberal position. I'm pro-choice, I'm pro-marriage equality, things like that. I believe in having a social safety net. I believe we do need things like a welfare program and unemployment insurance and things like that. And, there are a lot of issues that we discuss where I do take the liberal position. I'm very much opposed to the death penalty. That's something I'm very passionate about. Ross Terrio and I, in fact, have had discussions about that. Gary actually opposes the death penalty, although he did not always. Ross is in favor of it. Maybe we'll talk about that later on rock, paper, hand grenades. But there is a conservative side to me, and there are certain things, this is why I say I'm not a liberal. There are certain things about me that I think disqualify me from liberalism, and there are some conservative principles and even some very libertarian attitudes that I have. One of them is, I'm very skeptical. I share the conservative and libertarian skepticism of government. I think government should be limited. I think government spends too much in some aspects, has too much power, and exerts too much control. And I think government needs to be limited. And I think in many ways government is ineffective, ineffectual, wasteful, and so forth. And certain things need to be reined in. And I'm pro-business. One of the things that drove me out of the Democratic Party is in the mid-2000s is that side of the Democratic Party seemed to be disappearing. I often see former senator from Tennessee, Harold Ford. I often see him on Morning Joe on MSNBC. I'm a big Morning Joe fan. And a big fan of Joe Scarborough. He's the kind of Republican I actually really like in many ways. He defines himself as a conservative, by the way, but I think he's really very moderate compared to the current Republican Party. But, Harold Ford, I mentioned him as an example of a Democrat who got chased out of office because the party was going hard left. And Harold Ford is a pro-business, pro-capitalism, pro-Second Amendment Democrat. And he got chased out. He got pushed out. So, he's just one example. I remember in '92, Bill Clinton and Al Gore ran as New Democrats. Do you remember that term? You don't hear that anymore. They were New Democrats. Pro-business, pro-capitalist, pro-smaller, leaner government Democrats. There's no New Democrat movement now. They all got chased out. So I'm for limiting regulation. Be patient with me. We're getting there. We're getting to the issue in a moment, but there's a reason why I'm setting all this up. So I'm for limited regulation on business. I think government gets in the way. It hampers small business, not only at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level. Ask any business owner who's ever owned any kind of brick and mortar establishment, a storefront, where they had to deal with local zoning laws, these stupid little laws that say, and every town, every city in America has them, that, if you're gonna hang a sign on your business, so people know what the hell the business is. It can only be this many centimeters wide and this many inches tall, and it has to be exactly this high off the ground. And it can only be these colors, and if it lights up at night, it has to shut off by a certain time, and all that stuff. All that stuff. I hate all that stuff. I hate the way government holds down small business and just gets in the way. And with our complicated tax codes and all of that stuff, I hate all that stuff. I hate bureaucracy. And these are all things that disqualify me from being a liberal. And these are all things where I tend to take a more conservative, not quite libertarian attitude. Because I'm a pro-business guy. I'm a pro-capitalist guy. Now, I'm for fair capitalism, which is why I support some regulation. I was a big fan, a big supporter of the Consumer Protection Act, and some of these predatory industries needed to be reined in, like the credit card companies, and some of these banks making, well, that's a whole separate issue, but some of the loans that led to the housing bubble, and, by the way, it was Bill Clinton, a Democrat, who really is responsible for the banking deregulation that I think led to the housing crisis, which triggered the Great Recession, which all this. So there is such a thing as being a little too pro-business because you don't want to be reckless with it. Capitalism should not be completely unfettered and just reckless. And, even though I agree with libertarians on a lot of things, I could never be a libertarian because they envision this sort of Wild West, anything goes, buyer beware version of capitalism that I absolutely cannot sign on to. So there is a place for some government regulation. I believe we need labor laws. I believe we need environmental protections. There are certain, anti-discrimination laws. I don't think it should be legal to, discriminate against people in the workplace or under any circumstances because of, religious affiliations or gender or race or anything like that. So some regulation is necessary. But, again, I have a strong aversion to bureaucracy, too much bureaucracy. And Democrats and liberals don't. And this is why I had to part company. This is one of the reasons I had to part company with the Democratic Party. There has to be a limit. There has to be a limit on how much power and regulation the government can exert on business. There has to be. Having said all that, we have an issue now. I'm going to get to it now. This is what it is. We have an issue now that is being hotly contested. Glenn and I were talking about it, and I can tell from the conversation I had with Glenn, he and I are going to disagree on this, and certainly liberals are going to disagree with me on this. And this issue is so divisively partisan. This is a very 100% partisan issue. Every Republican I know of, every Republican I talk to, every Republican I see on television discussing this issue is absolutely 100% opposed to what I'm about to discuss. And every Democrat, every liberal is absolutely 100% in favor of it. And my liberal audience, because I do believe that this show has more liberals than conservatives who watch this show and who listen to my radio show because of the perception of me as really being a closet liberal. Look, I talk a lot on this show about in the Republican Party, if you step out of line on anything, if you fail to take the far right position on anything, they call you a rhino. They send all this hate and anger your way, and they say, you're not one of us and whatnot. Well, that's not just a Republican thing, because what I'm about to reveal in terms of this particular issue that I'm about to discuss, I'm going to get some hate from the left. My liberal viewers and my liberal friends, even though I'm going to, as clearly and concisely as I possibly can, explain why I agree with the Republicans on this issue, I'm going to get some hate. They're going to call me all kinds of names, and people are going to, there's going to be Facebook postings, and maybe that phone's going to ring, I don't know, and people are going to be really mad at me, and I will explain why I feel the way I do, and it won't matter. Just like happens on the right, it happens on the left too. They're going to say, apparently, Matt, we thought you were one of us, but it looks like you're joining the Republican war on women. And it won't matter how much I try to explain myself. I just gave you a very big hint, a very big clue. All right, here it comes. I'm going to tell you what it is. And I'm ready for the slings and arrows that are about to come my way. I agree with the Republicans. After giving this a lot of thought, by the way, I had mixed feelings about it, but I've concluded this. I agree with the Republicans, and I stand in opposition to the Democrats on the Paycheck Fairness Act. There, I said it. Now, every liberal watching this show now thinks that I'm a sexist and a chauvinist and I'm joining the Republican war on women and all that. Let me explain myself why I oppose it and why I agree with the Republicans on this issue. This is going to create larger problems than it solves. And again, where I tend to be more conservative is I'm always skeptical of any new law that has good intentions, but I think may cause larger problems than it could possibly solve. And I also think there has to be a limit. And I guess I'm drawing the line here. This is where I'm drawing my line. There has to be a limit in terms of how much the government directly regulates and involves itself and interferes with business. And this is the limit for me. I do not support the Paycheck Fairness Act. Now, for those who don't know, and I assume my audience knows, but in case you don't know, the Paycheck Fairness Act, in a nutshell, I'm oversimplifying for the sake of, for the kids in the class who haven't kept up. I'm going to try to catch you up here really quick. But it basically would make it illegal to not pay women the same rate as men for doing the same job, if gender is in any way, if gender factors into it. I oppose this law. And I'm going to read to you something, and then I will expand on it. But because this is something, a quick example here that I found online on Forbes.com. Daniel Fisher wrote this, and I think he explains it here more succinctly and clearly and coherently than I can, just talking off the top of my head. So I'll read this to you. It's a very short article, and then I will add and I will expand on what he's saying here. This is from a couple of weeks ago, but it's still very relevant. So again, this is on Forbes.com. Daniel Fisher writes, Paycheck Fairness Act will be anything but. President Obama on Tuesday called for the Senate to pass the Paycheck Fairness Act, calling it a common sense bill. Alan Dinkoff with the employment law practice at Wheel, Gottschall, and Mangus has a problem with that description. Some parts may be common sense, Dinkoff says, such as expanding the anti-retaliation provisions, developing training for girls and women to improve their negotiating skills, and studying the reasons for persistent pay disparities in the workplace. But he says, quote, but the core of the bill is anything but common sense, unquote, says Dinkoff, who was in charge of employment law at Merrill Lynch and general counsel of GAF before joining Wheel in 2009. He says, quote, the bill risks altering in very fundamental ways how corporate America compensates its employees without any real justification for imposing that burden, unquote. Here's Dinkoff's analysis. Under existing law, companies can respond to a new hire's please listen to this very carefully, by the way. If you're sitting there and you're watching me and you're furious with me right now because you can't understand how I could possibly oppose this, please listen carefully to what Dinkoff says here. This is so very important. And I understand if you've never been in a management position, if you've never been in charge of hiring people, if you've never been a business owner, or if you're someone who just loves bureaucracy, or if you're a trial lawyer, this is going to be difficult for you to digest and accept. And maybe you've already turned me off and you're not even listening at this point. But please, if you're still with me, listen to this. This is so important. Under existing law, companies can respond to a new hire's prior pay history or compensation demands. For example, Fair Pay Shipping Company decides it wants to hire shipping managers and pay them $30,000. Okay, so this fictional theoretical company, they have this position, and the rate of pay for that position as a shipping manager is $30,000. That's what that job pays. It offers employment to two people. Okay, they're going to hire two people, John and Sally. Sally accepts the $30,000 pay rate, but John demands $33,000, which the company agrees to pay. They really want to hire John. John has a lot of experience. Maybe John has experience that Sally doesn't. You know? There could be all kinds of reasons why John is more qualified, more experienced, but they've got to hire two people. So they're hiring both John and Sally, but John demands more money, and they really want to hire him. All right, so John demands $33,000, which the company agrees to pay. Under the existing statute, probably no problem, because the law currently says that an employer is not liable if it paid John and Sally differently for a reason other than gender. Right? So if John is more qualified for the job, John has more experience, maybe John has more education, he makes his demand, and they say, okay. And they're still hiring Sally as well. They're hiring two people. The same would be true if Fair Pay Shipping Company decided to pay each new hire $1,000 more than they made in their previous employment, and John made more than Sally in their previous jobs. Now, see, and that all sounds reasonable to me. Okay, now look, again, some of you watching, and there's more to this article that we'll get to, but I digress. Instead of reading the whole thing and then commenting on it, I can't help myself. I'm unleashed. Okay, so look, I'm someone who has been in charge of hiring people. I've worked in management, okay? And these situations arise where you have someone who maybe is more qualified, has more experience, so you want to be able to pay them a little more. And if they say, well, I'm only going to work for this much money, then you give in if you really want to hire that person. That just happens. And I can honestly tell you, all the years I was in a job where I'd have to hire people, never, ever, ever, not once, did I ever think, did it ever even cross my mind, okay, well, this new hire's a female. I bet I can get away with paying her less. Never entered my mind. I'm not saying there isn't sexism out there. I'm not saying there isn't gender discrimination out there. I'm sure there is. There's all kinds of crap out there that in the year 2014, we as a civilization should be embarrassed that we're still not past. Whether it's gender discrimination, sexism, chauvinism, all of that, or whether it's racism and prejudice or religious discrimination, all that stuff. It's amazing we're not past all that, but we're not, and it's still out there, and it's all still a thing. But I'm just telling you from my personal experience, and that does color my views and my perspective on this. These things happen where you're hiring people to do the same job, and you're inevitably going to pay them or want to pay them at different rates. What is this company in this example supposed to do when John demands $33,000? Are they supposed to then say, well, okay, we're going to pay you the $33,000, but now we also have to pay Sally $33,000 because we're hiring you both at the same time? Well, that's not going to work. What if Sally doesn't deserve that additional $3,000 because she doesn't have the same experience and education that John has? And if I'm the one doing the hiring, I should have the right to make that determination, to look at the data in front of me, to look at the facts and say, okay, John deserves that additional money, not because he's a dude, because he has more experience in education. And by the way, I should be able to make that determination without sitting there going, well, hell, I might get sued for this. Because I better make sure I'm able to prove that gender had absolutely nothing to do with my decision. I have to prove that. If Sally finds out that John is making more money and Sally decides to sue me, to sue the company, I've got to be able to prove that gender played no role in my decision. And how do I prove that? Here's the rub. I can't prove it because you can't prove a negative. I can offer evidence to suggest that gender had nothing to do in my decision. I can say, look, John, here's John's resume. Here's a copy of John's resume. Here's a copy of Sally's resume. See how John had more experience? See how John has more education or whatever it is about John that made him worth that extra money. See that? That's why I agreed to John's pay rate. Okay? But here's what I can't prove. I can't prove that it wasn't kicking around in my brain. Well, it's a good thing that I have this evidence to back up the idea that, that John's worth paying more money to, because otherwise, I'd have to find some other reason, because clearly John's worth more. He's a guy. He has man parts. So, of course, I want to pay him more. I can't prove that wasn't in my head. You can't prove a negative. So to put the burden of proof on me as the employer is wrong. I just got a text from Norm that says, are you coming on tonight? I'm Norm's co-host on Norm and Friends, and I'm not sure why I wouldn't be there. There's all kinds of problems here. Let me read the rest of the article to you. The result would be very different under the Paycheck Fairness Act, which eliminates the, quote, reason other than sex defense and substitutes instead a requirement that the employer prove that its pay practices are divorced from any discrimination in its workplace or at the employer's prior workplace, or at the employee's prior workplace, that the pay practice is job-related and that it is consistent with business necessity. So now employers must have one pay for a job, not only at the entry level, but throughout the organization. For example, what if a year after Fay Pear Shipping Company hires John and Sally, John comes in and asks for a raise, but Sally does not? Under the existing law, Fay Pear Shipping is probably okay giving John a raise and not Sally. John took the initiative to come in and ask for a raise. Maybe John's doing a great job and says, I deserve a raise. I'm going to go in and ask for a raise. And maybe Sally doesn't bother. Maybe Sally's doing a great job too, but doesn't have the initiative to come in and ask for a raise. Or maybe Sally's not doing such a great job. Maybe Sally's just doing an average job. Maybe John doesn't ask for a raise at all. Maybe I notice that John is doing a better job than Sally, so I decide I want to reward John with a raise. Or maybe I hear rumors and rumblings that John's been, exploring the possibility of possibly going and getting another job. So I want to give him a raise. I want to keep him here. I should be able to do that. I should be able to make those decisions without having to worry that I'm going to get sued because Sally finds out that John's making more money. I, as the employer, as the manager, should have that right. The government should not be able to tell me I can't do that. Nor should they be able to make me have to sit there and worry and stress over what's going to happen if I make these basic management decisions that anyone who's in management, who's in charge of hiring and firing people, or anyone who's a business owner has to make these decisions. It's part of the gig. Let's see. Therefore, companies will have far less flexibility in addressing different salary histories for new hires, different salary demands from existing employees, the size of pay raises for people promoted into new roles, and so on. The law would make these changes without real evidence that these steps will eliminate pay disparities between men and women, or any thought on the impact of restricting a company's ability to respond to the different needs and demands of its employees. Not so common sense. So that was from Forbes.com. So that's it. That's the argument. The argument against the Paycheck Fairness Act, it has nothing to do with, sexism or chauvinism, or we need to make sure that women aren't paid as much as men, and, men can do a better job and all that nonsense. It's got nothing to do with any of that. The Paycheck Fairness Act is going to create more problems than it solves, I think, on a couple of levels. By the way, I'm looking online. John, I'm looking online here, and unless it's just this browser, I don't think we're streaming, just so you know. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, so no one's watching us on IPM Nation. All right, folks. So anyway, well, hopefully you're watching us on MPTS. That explains the text from Norm, maybe. Maybe he thought that I wasn't on. Oh, no, he's probably watching on his regular TV. I don't know. This is going to be a problem for employers. Well, this is going to create larger problems in a couple of ways. Let me put it that way. Number one, some employers, I guarantee you, are going to avoid hiring women. They are. I guarantee you that will be a side effect if this becomes law. Some employers are going to avoid hiring women because they don't want to even risk being in the position of potentially being sued or having the government come in and look at what they're doing. That will be a result of this. Because again, I can tell you from my own experience, this is something employers think about. Large companies, small businesses, employers think about this stuff. About limiting their legal and liability exposure in terms of hiring practices and a lot of other things. There are some employers who simply won't hire women. They won't want to look like they're avoiding hiring women, so they may go through the motions of setting up interviews with women, etc., but then they just, they won't hire them. Also, too, this is great for lawyers because another consequence of this, another side effect of this, will be an increase in lawsuits, an increase in civil litigation. Guaranteed. And again, the employer is at a disadvantage because you can't prove a negative. You can't prove what's in your heart, what's in your mind, that you don't have any inclination to discriminate in regard to gender. And of course, the trial lawyers lobby is very powerful. So of course they are all in favor of this. They are all in favor of this. So there will be some unintended consequences and side effects of this. And again, the line has to be drawn somewhere. And employers and managers need to feel free to hire whomever they want to at whatever pay rate that applicant is willing to accept without fear. And by the way, the whole retaliation thing, that's already been addressed in a previous law. It's already illegal. A lot of people don't realize this. It's already illegal for an employer to retaliate against an employee or employees for discussions regarding rates of pay. And the rate of pay thing and discussing that, that's another problem I have with this. What if I'm working for a company and I don't want anyone to know how much I make. What if it's not John and I who get hired at this fictional company in this example, these theoretical people in this hypothetical example, the Fair Pay Shipping Company. Suppose it's myself and Sally. I'm the male in the example. And maybe I don't want Sally to know how much I make. And maybe I object to her being able to storm into the boss's office and say, because some people are making this transparency argument. I'm all for transparency in government. I'm not necessarily for transparency when it comes to how much money I make, when it comes to what my salary is. Maybe I don't want Sally to know, because maybe I don't want anybody to know, because maybe it's nobody's business. Obviously, my boss knows, but maybe I don't want my coworkers to know. Because, at IPM Nation, everybody I hire is strictly as independent contractors and they work on commission. But, up until last October, I worked for a company where, people would ask me sometimes, like people who are interested in working for the same company would ask me, well, before they would apply, well, how much do you make? And I wouldn't tell them because it was none of their business. I would find a way to very politely and diplomatically say that, but I wouldn't tell anyone how much I made. I wouldn't tell anyone my salary. I had employees working underneath me who would ask me, who were curious. They'd want to know, well, how much do you make here? I wouldn't tell them. I'd say, I'm not discussing that with you because it's nobody's business. It's nobody's business except the people who pay me. Anybody above me on the ladder, it's their business. Anyone at my level or below me or someone who doesn't even work for the company who's just curious and don't have the manners or the common sense or the tact to know that asking someone how much they make is rude, no, it's none of their business. So maybe I don't want Sally to be able to get access to my rate of pay. Maybe I don't want her to know because maybe it's just none of her business. Now, of course, I don't think there should be any retaliation if people discuss their rates of pay. If Sally comes to me and asks me, and I decide to actually tell her, I don't think she should be retaliated against for that in any way. But by the way, the Paycheck Fairness Act, which claims to prevent retaliation, prohibit retaliation, there's already an existing law that does that. So that's another thing that drives me nuts about passing more and more laws is that sometimes they're redundant. Why don't we just enforce the existing law? And by the way, any trial lawyer out there, I think they can figure out a way to enforce the existing law if they think they want to file a lawsuit and get some money on behalf of a client who's claiming that they're being paid at an unfair rate. Another potential pitfall, but this is something that would this is something specific to myself. Probably no one else would get into this situation, but because it annoys me so much when somebody asks me how much money I make, because again, I think it's rude and obnoxious, and it just shows, if it's somebody really close to me who I don't mind sharing personal information with, that's fine. But when somebody just asks me, maybe somebody I don't know very well, or they're just curious or whatever, and they say, so how much do you make? It's like, I just find that very rude, and it shows such a lack of manners and tact and common sense that very often, and this is a habit that I developed as a kid, and it's carried over into my adult life, like a lot of habits do, because I just find that so rude and not tactful. I have this policy that I will sometimes I'll just lie instead of telling them it's none of their business. And it's sort of my own little petty way in my mind of getting a little bit of revenge on this person. I'll just tell them a lie. I'll just lie to them. And I don't feel badly about it, even though I'm a very honest person and I don't usually go around lying to people. But my rationale is, well, it's their own fault. They deserve being lied to because they should have some tact and common sense and some manners and know better than to ask me a question like that. So if somebody asks me how much money I make, very often, in many cases, I've just told them an exorbitant amount that couldn't possibly be true for the job I was doing, and then watch them go, really? You make that much? And I'd be like, oh yeah, well, I've been doing this a long time and whatnot, and just try to get them to believe it, even though the number I gave them was so outrageous. And again, I just do that because, it's their own fault for not being smart enough and having the common sense and the manners to know that that's a rude thing to ask somebody. How much money they make is none of their damn business. But of course, in this scenario, under the Paycheck Fairness Act, if I told Sally, oh yeah, I make $200,000 a year just for, showing up at this 40-hour-a-week job, and then she goes and storms into the boss's office and says, well, how come Matt's making $200,000 a year and I'm making $30,000 a year? And then the boss is going to deny that that's true and say, what? He told you what? And then next thing you know, she's talking to a lawyer saying, well, not only did this guy who does the same job as I do, not only does he make an exponentially larger amount of money than me, but then when I went and talked to my boss about it, he denied the whole thing. So now they're lying to me about how much Matt is making. Of course, again, that's kind of an outrageous example of where this would come into play, because most people probably don't intentionally lie when they're asked a question that's nobody's business because they want to just do that. So there you go. So I've not only revealed my position on this issue, but there's a little quirk of my personality. So just so you know, anyone who knows me personally, if you ask me a question that's none of your business and you should not have asked me and you should have known better, I may just lie to you. So you know, and I won't feel badly about it. So there you go. Now all my liberal friends and viewers hate me because I revealed my position on the Paycheck Fairness Act, but I do agree with the Republicans on that. And I think their arguments against it are common sense and logical. So we spent most of the show on that. We do have a little bit of time left. Something that's been really bothering me, and I could probably rant about this for an entire show, but like I said, we don't have a lot of time left, so I'll address it quickly. Oh, we actually have a call. I guess we will stay on this. Hi, welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed. Who's this?
Hey, Matt, come on. You know you make $300,000 a year just on my show alone.
Oh, well, it's a good thing, Norm, that we don't have another co-host who happens to be female on the show.
Right.
Because then they'd be suing you for paying me more.
I'd be in a lot of trouble. By the way, we got amethyst definitely coming on, but, with all the quirks and bonuses, you know and I know, you make more than I do, and I'm the host of the show.
It's in my contract, Norm.
No, that's what it is. And you know what? I don't blame you for not telling, because, or when these people have called in on my show, what do you do for work and how much money do you make?
Yeah.
I didn't realize that we had to owe the public an explanation of any type of money that we make.
Right, yeah, it's nobody's business. I mean, especially like when a complete stranger asks you how much money you make, it's like, what? Did you really just ask me that?
Yeah.
So yeah, I just lie to people.
So we need to poke him in the eye, maybe?
Right, yeah, Three Stooges style.
Yeah, okay, I'll see you at 4.
All right, Norm, I'll see you then. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. That was, of course, Norm Moody from Norm and Friends. We'll be live at 4 to 6 later on today. And, of course, from 6 to 7, Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades with the Honorable Gary S. Hopper making his triumphant return back for the attack. Geez, maybe I don't want to get into this. Maybe I want to, okay, I was going to discuss EBT cards and food stamps and all that, but that's going to take too long. I have a lot to say there. You know what? Let's go with something that won't take a lot of time. Rand Paul. Let me talk about Rand Paul for a minute. A few weeks ago on the show, I read an op-ed that Rand Paul had written regarding foreign policy. And I read that on the show because I loved it. It was so great. It was a great op-ed. And he said a lot of things that a lot of other Republicans won't say. And of course, Rand Paul kind of represents more the libertarian wing of the party, as does his father, although his father does more so because his father, I think, really is a true libertarian who found a home in the Republican Party, whereas I think of Rand Paul as being more libertarian / conservative. In some ways, he's more like a traditional conservative than he is a libertarian. But he said some things in that op-ed regarding foreign policy that I think absolutely had to be said. And I loved that op-ed. I am not, for the record, just to clarify, I'm not a Rand Paul supporter. There are things I very much like about him. There are also some things about him that I don't care for. So I'm not a supporter, but I got to give the guy credit for that op-ed that I read on the air a few weeks ago. But one of the things I'm fascinated by in the case of Rand Paul is clearly he's running for president. Again, he hasn't announced anything yet, but he's doing the fundraising. It's obvious he's laying the groundwork for a run. And you can tell by just travel patterns is the easiest way to tell who's running and who's not. If any of these guys are spending time in New Hampshire, Iowa, or South Carolina on a consistent basis, they're running. Rand Paul, he was in New Hampshire just the other day. So this is what I think will be fascinating to watch play out is how does Rand Paul, as a more libertarian-style Republican, in a Republican Party that has been sort of taken over, and I would argue almost in a way held hostage by the ideology of the Tea Party, how does Rand Paul relate to and build support with the base of the party and the rest of the party as a whole? How does he do that? And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how he sort of maneuvers and steers through those waters, through that potential minefield. I mean, I'm very skeptical that he can get through the primaries and actually become the Republican nominee for president in 2016. But and it's already getting interesting because he's already making little statements and comments here and there. This is from, what was this? I'm not sure where this was from now. I think it was Huffington Post. Just very quickly, he says here, Rand Paul says GOP needs to agree to disagree on social issues. This is a big clue as to where the campaign's going to go. Says here, Senator Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, says in a new interview that Republicans should embrace a more tolerant view of those who don't hold conservative positions on social issues. He told Vocative.com, quote, I think that the Republican Party, in order to get bigger, will have to agree to disagree on social issues. The Republican Party is not going to give up on having quite a few people who do believe in traditional marriage, but the Republican Party also has to find a place for young people and others who don't want to be festooned to those issues, unquote. Paul's comments harken back somewhat to former Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels' call for a truce on social issues within the GOP. The comment at the time drew a rebuke from social conservatives. At that time, those groups aren't as influential as they are in today's Republican Party, where an increasing number of people now support gay marriage, for instance. There's code here. There's a lot you can take from that. He's saying something very big with that one comment, Rand Paul, about Republicans not focusing on social issues. And here's what that's code for. Shut up about abortion. I don't want to talk about it. Yeah, I'm pro-life, whatever. I don't want to talk about it. And shut up about gay marriage. Yeah, I'm for traditional marriage, but please, I don't want to talk about it. That's what he's really saying, because he really doesn't want to talk about it. Now, this is where he's more traditional conservative than libertarian. So in one respect, it's interesting that he doesn't want to talk about these issues because talking about these issues would solidify his stance with the base. Because he opposes gay marriage, he's for traditional marriage. The base, the conservative base of the Republican Party, that should shore up support with them. And being pro-life should shore up support with the Republican base. But he's looking at the bigger picture, and he's looking past doing what he has to do, at least in terms of this, in the context of this comment. He's looking past doing and saying what he has to get through the primaries to win the nomination, and he's looking toward the general election, where he doesn't want to be taken down by a party that is very much stuck in a very conservative ideology on social issues. And I think this gives us a big clue as to how he's going to try to steer his way to the Republican nomination. It is going to be fascinating to watch this. because in some ways, he's very much an outsider, but in some ways, he also has some very significant opportunities to gain support among independents, libertarians, and even Democrats. It's going to be very interesting to see how he plays it. He's a much more skillful, more polished politician than his father is. But then again, his father never minded being a bomb thrower and sort of almost a bull in the china shop in terms of the Republican Party at those debates, for example, the Republican debates, because his father wanted to kind of steer the conversation and redirect some of the conversation, but he knew he was never going to be president. Rand Paul actually has a shot, unlike his dad, at actually getting to the nomination and possibly even becoming president. And he's playing it like he knows he has a shot. And it's going to be really interesting to see how he proceeds. On the Democratic side, that's going to be interesting too, by the way. Hillary Clinton, she's going to be challenged on the left by somebody, possibly Elizabeth Warren. And if Biden gets into, it's going to be a very, very fascinating 2016 presidential run on both sides. And I'm already, I know it's only 2014, it's April 2014, but I'm, as a political junkie, I can't help but get excited and look forward to it, as the rest of the political media does as well. It's exciting times, my friends. Very, very exciting times. That's going to do it for this week's television edition of Matt Connarton Unleashed. And don't forget, of course, the radio edition of Unleashed every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern on the Dr. Kevin Radio Network. You can go to drkevinradionetwork.com or ipmnation.com. That will get you to the show as well. I'll be back next week with another television edition. And if you're watching us live on Wednesday afternoon, if it's Wednesday, you know the drill. I'll be back at 4 p.m. with Norm and at 6 o'clock with Gary, making his return to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. That's it for now. I'll talk at you all later. Thanks, everybody.